Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club.
Theme music.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Marvel Reread Club. It is me, it is Steve, and it is our special guest. We have Heidi MacDonald, who for 20 years now has been doing the comics blog, The Beat, the news blog of comics culture. How is that going, Heidi?
Well, it's going for 20 years. And hey, Steve, hey, Matt, it's nice to be on here. You have doggedly been pursuing me for a while, and it's always, I'll tell you, I get asked to do a lot of podcasts. Mm-hmm. It takes me a long time sometimes because guess what? Yeah. Doing a daily news website is very time consuming. But Steve and I go way back, and I really wanted to be on the show. It was such a great concept also for a podcast. So here I am, 20 years. I like to say mic drop. I can walk away now, throw my spider suit in the trash, a blogger no more, if I want.
Yeah. When is your actual 20th anniversary? Has it already passed?
Yes, it was on July 1st, but I've had a whole year-long celebration of 20 years. We did a series of panels at WonderCon, San Diego Comic-Con, and we had a party. We had a swell party at New York Comic-Con. Had some photos up of that. So looking back, it's interesting. Steve, what were you doing 20 years ago?
I was still working on inking. I still at that point had my day job for 3 days a week doing Flash development. Oh, actually 20 years ago. Okay, 20 years ago, we had just moved into this house. Yeah, earlier this month. Earlier that month, we had just moved into the house. And right before that, we had taken our trip to Europe that we'd been saving up vacation days for years. And we did in advance of having our kid. That we wanted to get that in first. And so my history with you, Heidi, you were my editor on Hunter Age of Magic, which was my longest standing job in comics. When you hired me for that, you sort of gave me that like, well, you're on board. I don't know if you made the right decision here, but you asked for it. So now you got it. And I also apparently spoke with you on the phone mere moments after your layoff at DC.
Yes, that's right. Yes. That was fantastic. I think you were one of the first people to call, and I was so shocked, but it all led to The Beat, and we did some good things. They recently omnibused our run. They did the 3-volume Books of Magic collection of all the Tim Hunter stuff. They included all the Books of Magic and Hunter stuff in the 3rd volume, and it looks nice. So I saw Richard Case, the artist, the penciler on those books at Baltimore Comic-Con just a couple of weeks ago, actually, when we were hanging out and reminiscing. So, that was, and Dylan Horrocks, the writer. That was a good team. Those were good times, good team, good book.
Yeah. I had a lot of fun with it, and it was a dream to work with Rich Case, who had done the iconic run on Doom Patrol, which was an integral part of my maturation of my comics tastes in later high school.
Those were some incredible books. I mean, I think we just realize now how those early years of Vertigo, just how influential they were, just how powerful those books were. Like Doom Patrol, obviously, Hellblazer, Sandman, the list goes on. Just good stuff.
Yeah.
Matt, what were you doing 20 years ago?
I guess I was getting a master's in screenwriting from Columbia University back in 2004. But my life took various twists and turns since then and became a writing advice blogger. And then that got turned into 2 very successful books. And then that's led to all sorts of twists and turns since then. But now I think of myself primarily as an author, working on a new book. I got 2 podcasts, and I'm a happy guy.
Yeah. Well, there's so many more outlets than there were 20 years ago, basically. So,
yeah. Certainly my wife and I both, we would have no idea how to advise anybody on becoming an author other than start a blog, give it away for free, and then someone will pay you to publish it, which is what we both did. Both of our early books were just collections of our blog, which we had already given away for free.
I give many people that advice, and it doesn't always work. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, doesn't always work. You have to have a really good blog. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into these comics. So, Heidi, were you able to read all 9 of these comics from April 1967.
I was not able to read all of them, and that's on me. When you run a website about comic books, so you very rarely have time to read comic books, unfortunately,
Yes.
which as comics makers are always saying, as soon as they get into the business, they don't read as many. So I regret that. I did read some of them, and I scanned all of them. So I'm ready to have opinions. I'm ready to put out my opinions. Yeah, why don't we just go down the list and I'll say the one that I went to first. So if you don't mind my suggesting we do that one first, that I did read the whole thing, and maybe I regret that I did, is X-Men, because I'm a big X-Men fan. That's my gateway drug. And X-Men 31 made me realize why this book got canceled.
Well, it would still last for another, 40 issues after this, which is amazing because it's really a low quality book at this point. So should we go ahead and begin with X-Men number 31?
Sure. There's nowhere to go but up.
Go but up. All right. Let's go and discuss X-Men 31. We must destroy the Cobalt Man. Bonus, don't miss our gripping glimpses into the private lives of Marvel's much maligned mutants. So last issue, Werner Roth, the regular penciler for X-Men, was gone, and we had Jack Sparling, who Steve thought wasn't as good as Werner Roth. I thought he was better than Werner Roth. Sparling had bought John Tartaglione along with him. This issue, Werner Roth is back, and John Tartaglione has stayed. So that's sort of the worst of both worlds as far as I'm concerned. But when we begin, of course, Professor Xavier is trying to kill them all. He has got them in the most harrowing danger room situation we have ever seen them in. They are almost being incinerated alive, which is one of the worst ways to die, I think. And they barely survive, and he congratulates them on it. And they in no way go like, we need to talk. This is not cool. On the bottom of page 3, you really see, I think, Roth and Tartaglione not coming together well. You don't want to draw people just looking like Casper the Friendly Ghost with having no lines on their face. But on the other hand, the amount of crags on Professor Xavier's face on the bottom of page 3 are really extreme. Like, he's got a craggy-ass face, especially as someone who's not supposed to be old. The indention in his forehead looks like it's about 3 inches deep, and I'm not a fan of it. We then get something that happens fairly regularly in this comic. Professor Xavier says, actually, let's go ahead and I'll take a break, and you guys go on and do your private lives. So that means that, of course, Hank and Bobby go to hang out in Greenwich Village. Meanwhile, Scott and Warren are fighting over Jean. Jean, meanwhile, is more interested in the guy she has met in college. Now, we've had this bizarre thing that's been going on for many issues where she's been hanging out with this hot guy in college, Ted, but he can only talk about his brother Ralph, who he's been talking about for several issues. They, for some reason, they really wanted to set up this issue. They said, we can't just dump Ralph, aka the Cobalt Man, on everybody. We've got to foreshadow him for several issues. Well, now it finally all pays off. The two brothers, Ralph and Ted, are competing over Jean, and they have a pole vault contest like you do, but they use an old rotten pole vault. I knew we shouldn't have used one of those old discarded poles. If anything has happened to him.
I mean, look, I just got to jump in here and say, you know, I'm a huge X-Men fan. This issue has all the elements that would make the new X-Men the greatest gateway comic of the 70s and 80s, including Professor X conspiring, love triangles, and the personal lives of the characters very much front and center. But once this harrowing danger room scene ends, it really turns into a really bad issue of Archie comics with these young adults going off and dating. And, I never read any of these comics. And from April 1967, at that point, I was alive. I was a tiny little girl. I was reading Karl Barks and John Stanley, who were great cartoonists who wrote great dialogue, unlike Roy the Boy Thomas. And
we should explain that you later went on to help found the group Friends of Lulu, to celebrate women in comics and women reading of comics, which were inspired by John Stanley's Lulu comics. And so I think that you were making wise purchasing decisions in 1967. Not that there weren't a lot of great Marvel comics you could have been reading, but those were some pretty great comics you were reading.
Well, there were some pretty good comics this month as well. Also, I mean, it's such a mixed bag, but this one was just like, I had to be, I can just imagine what they were saying around the office about this X-Men book. Because first off, there's the other issue this month of the Avengers is penciled by Don Heck, who got a bad rap among many for their famous interview where he was called the worst hack in comics.
Interview between Gary Groth
and Harlan Ellison. Yes, the infamous.
Harlan Ellison, yes, where they sort of accidentally called Don Heck the worst Heck in comics, and then later they realized they had meant to say Selby Summa, and they accidentally said Don Heck, and it stuck for Heck.
But neither of those is accurate. I love Selby Summa. He's a great.
I love Sal. He's one of my favorites.
So they didn't mean that. What they meant to say was Werner Roth. And
no. Do you actually know this, or are you just saying?
No, I that was just a laugh line. But I gotta say, like he is not, of all these Silver Age cartoonists that we idolize, the name Werner Roth is not much brought up. I've never really thought about him. I've never really read an issue that he was the artist on, and I hope never to again, because he's just. It's just, I mean, maybe it's Tartaglione too. I mean, he's definitely John Tartaglione. He was not a great inker, but this book is so awkward, and between the dialogue is just, Roy Thomas. We had a joke, and Steve, you might have heard me say this before, because, when we worked together, we spent long hours on the phone just bullshitting. It was we didn't have podcasts then, so we would talk on the phone. But, when I was Marv Wolfman's assistant at Disney Adventures, and when I lived in LA, and Marv and I shared a small office, Len Wein was the editor-in-chief of Disney Comics. And anyway, the joke was Roy Thomas. And Marv said that there was a panel in Conan the Barbarian where a rain of venomous snakes was falling. And the caption says, suddenly a rain of venomous snakes falls from the sky. And of course, the great John Buscema draws venomous snakes falling from the sky. And then one of the characters in the panel cries out, "Aye, a rain of venomous snakes." And I've used that ever since, i.e. a rain of venomous snakes, as the unnecessary dialogue. And boy, is this, every single panel is just bludgeoned to death with expository and overwrought dialogue.
And he's gotten better. Like his first couple of issues of X-Men, there were some where clearly the letterer felt they had to shift the borders of the panels in order to cram everything in. Like you're looking at it like, why are there those weird border shifts? And then after a while, I was like, oh, yeah, no, that's why. You just couldn't fit everything in there. When you talk about Werner Roth, when we had Rachel Gluckstern on a little while ago, she was like, who is this mysterious Werner Roth? And I usually describe him as aggressively adequate, and Matt says that I'm giving him too much credit.
Yeah,
I got to say, I will defend Roy Thomas. I love Roy Thomas Conan comics. I've been reading them every night as I go to sleep. I'm now reading the 90s stuff.
And
I
love put you
a lot
to
of Roy
sleep,
Thomas.
Matt. You just
they literally put me to sleep
I need
every night.
To drift away. Need to nod off. Let me read these Roy Thomas comics. Yeah. No, I love Conan the Barbarian as well. But yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, we then cut to Bobby and Hank, who are once again hanging out in Greenwich Village at the Coffee A Go-Go. We once again see Bernard the poet, the avant-garde poet, who is reciting his thing and winning over Bobby's date. So Bobby goes and freezes Bernard's coffee. We then cut to, however...
Well, she might realize there's really no heat between her and Bobby. I mean, he's just really not that interested. He's just going through the motions.
Yeah, Bobby, they will eventually reveal that Bobby is gay, but that won't be for another 40 years worth of comics.
Hey, foreshadowing.
Right. It was the sort of thing where, like, once they revealed that Bobby was gay, it wasn't just out of nowhere. They're like, oh, come to think of it, this makes a lot of Bobby's history make more sense. Like, remember when he liked the cloud creature who would sometimes be male and sometimes be female? And he would always be like, oh, shucks, you're male again. Meanwhile, we get Warren, who goes to a different club. He goes to what seems to be a monkeys-themed club, the Monkey's Paw, MONKEE', where they are dancing to.
Oh my God, so relevant.
I'm a believer.
Hip.
Even in 1967, the Monkees weren't that hip. They were definitely a Beatles knockoff. But it's funny, at this club, the first time we see them all dancing, it's called the Monkey's Paw, and they're all dancing to Monkees music. But then a couple pages later, they're all dancing to Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone, which is
and they're just getting down. They're boogieing to Roll Like a Rolling Stone because that dance floor hit
Not that easy to dance to. Anyway, Warren meets a girl who he hasn't seen in a while named Candy Southern. She will then become his regular girlfriend for the next 30 years or so of comics. Meanwhile, we cut back to Ralph after he has had his hit on the head. He decides, hey, by the way, I've built my own knockoff Iron Man armor called the Cobalt Man armor. And now that I've been hit on the head, I realize I should probably, take over the world. Ted's like, that's not a good idea. Meanwhile, they've got Scott and Jean, who they have still been hanging out with, suddenly turn into Cyclops and Marvel Girl. And they're like, that's a little suspicious that we just had Scott and Jean here. They now look a lot like Cyclops and Marvel Girl who have just shown up. But so then Cyclops and Marvel Girl get in a big fight with Cobalt Man. We then cut to Professor X, who is once again in the dungeon of X Mansion with very much dungeony looking walls and doors. And he is doing chemistry with test tubes and mice in a cage.
I mean, that's clearly Pinky in the Brain.
Yes, clearly Pinky in the Brain. He gets a summons from Scott. He goes ahead and summons Hank and Bobby away from Greenwich Village and Warren away from the Monkey's Paw. They all eventually arrive. They all defeat the Cobalt Man. Really weak Werner Roth art. I am totally with you on this, Heidi. Weak penciling by Werner Roth, weak inking by Jordan Tartaglione. They eventually unzonk Ralph, who realizes that he never should have become the Cobalt Man, never should have tried to take over the world. But meanwhile, Ralph and Dad are a little suspicious now of Scott and Jean, and that is the end of the issue. Next issue, Beware the Juggernaut, my son.
Well, we're getting even more classic characters, but they're college kids, so they're not that stupid. Rather than make notes, I clipped some panels that really I loved. That's exactly what I do. Yeah. Yeah. So there's this really great panel of Scott and Jean running off. Cobalt Man is smashing through the club or whatever. And Scott's line really encapsulates everything that I find hard to swallow here. Those sounds like something being ruthlessly smashed. Because, when I hear danger, that's the first phrase I would use. Ruthlessly smashed, not violently smashed or terribly smashed. This would happen when I'm finally alone with Jean. They came from up ahead. Darn it. Scott was all set to ask me for a date. I know he was. Boy, this single panel will be played out endlessly for the next 50 years.
The best way to get somebody to ask you out for a date is to take them to hang out with your other college crush and going like, hey,
that's actually true.
I guess it's not the worst idea, but it's not the nicest idea, certainly. If it is true that is something that a girl would do, it's not something that guys would appreciate that a girl would do.
But
hey, by the way, here's someone else who has a crush on me.
Girls, it works even better with girls, though. If a girl is showing interest in a guy, the other girl will instantly be more interested in him. Just how it works. This other panel I had clipped was that one that you referenced, actually, of Professor X dabbling in his dungeon lab. And I mean, this has all the classic comic cliches: a cage full of white rats, test tubes, a beaker. And, Scott and Jean have just said that they're in terrible danger of this Cobalt dude. And Professor X is a jerk. A mental message is coming in on Cyclops frequency. He indicates serious trouble, but not immediate personal danger. Then I won't interrupt these vital experiments. But I'll contact the rest of the X-Men at once. Oh my God, Professor X. Oh, you're too busy farting around in your dungeon lab to even help your students. I mean, come on. Professor X is a jerk.
That's one of the things about the X-Men movies that they didn't get right, is that not only is Wolverine not short, but then also Professor X isn't a jerk. Those are the two biggest things that they got wrong in the X-Men movies.
In Logan, it turns out that Professor X killed a lot of his students accidentally. So that was fairly faithful.
So I just have a couple observations that haven't been mentioned already. One, some folks on Bill Cairns' Facebook group, we had Bill Cairns on for our previous two episodes, pointed out that Candy Southern is a reference to a novel called Candy by Terry Southern.
Oh my God, I have never put that together. You're totally right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't read it. But
just one more note again. I was a big X-Men fan, but I was also a big Beast fan, as written by actually Jim Shooter. Jim Shooter had such a great ear for dialogue that the teenaged me, the young me, really enjoyed. And, Roy Thomas, again, just goes insane with the overinflated vocabulary that Hank has here, and it's so hard to read. You know, it's risible.
Well, it's funny. Hank has had the most personality shifts of any character in Marvel Comics. Like Jim Shooter's Beast is very different from Stan Lee's Beast, who was different from Roy Thomas's Beast, who was different from Steve Englehart's Beast. But I like them all. I like the nerdy, big vocabulary Beast of the early issues, and I like the more comic relief Beast of Jim Shooter's issues. But it is odd that he changed so much.
Yeah.
So Heidi, which book would you like us to move on to next?
Just pick one. Maybe it'll be one I've read. Maybe it won't. But we can do a few more because it's fun to look at old comic books.
So should we go back to Amazing Spider-Man here, Matt? You think?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay,
you want to sum it up, Steve?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do this. So Amazing Spider-Man 47, Would You Believe Kraven the Hunter? So this one starts out a little bit odd in that we get a flashback to something that we have never seen before. Last time that Kraven was fighting Spider-Man, apparently he was put up to it by the Green Goblin. Green Goblin was going to pay him some money. Green Goblin, in his Norman Osborn identity, was being the go-between. And Kraven had followed Norman Osborn home, knew who he was. So
such a tease to start this issue. Like, we just have Kraven on the cover, but then we go to the splash page and it's Green Goblin flying around egging Kraven on. And it's so nice to have Green Goblin back. He's such a delightful character. And especially John Romita does such a great job with Green Goblin. And it's like, hey, it's a Green Goblin issue. And it's like, no, this is a flashback. He is not actually going to be in this issue, which is sort of disappointing. But it's nice to see him again, even if just in flashback.
Yes. So Kraven has just gotten out of prison. It's unclear whether he's going to try to get money out of the Green Goblin or just exact vengeance. But one way or the other, he's after him. Of course, Kraven somehow breaks into what they call the morgue room at the Daily Bugle, where they keep old copies of old newspapers, and happens to be in there and find the headline that says Green Goblin dies in fire. Okay, fine. We needs to know that. This is just as good a plot device.
Just a reminder that they did not have the internet. So really, he would have to be accidentally just hanging out in a newspaper morgue to find out past news. We did not have past news.
They had a microfiche room at the New York Public Library. He could have been there. And anyone who's allowed to get a library card, he could have done this entirely legally.
Yes, but when I did my senior thesis in college on New Yorker cartoons in the 1920s, believe me, lots of microfiche. Lots of microfiche. Anyway, we then see a little bit of an exchange on the phone between Peter Parker and Aunt May. Aunt May currently has Ms. Watson in the background. Aunt May has just moved in with Ms. Watson, and Mary Jane is dancing in the background. Now, people have pointed out to me that this fourth panel on page 4 showed up in some Deadpool comic where he's time traveling, and they're having to get through all of these parts in Marvel history sort of in disguise. And so in that one, Blind Al is playing the Aunt May role. Yeah. So we have some back and forth here. One thing I like is at one point we hear only Peter Parker's side of the conversation at this particular point. And he says, huh? What did you say? Aunt May, for the zillionth time, the word is pussycat, not pussy willow. And, there are little things like Mary Jane saying, hey, don't forget to tell them we're making the scene tonight. She's like, it's so rare to find a young lady who's interested in handicrafts. Anyway, Norman had gotten knocked on the head again and is back to trying to be a really good dad, has no memory that he was the Green Goblin. And so we see a little bit of that. Kraven, meanwhile, we see that he's got some new zappers that come out of the eyes of his lion vest. Looks like it's coming right out of his nip-nips there. And so meanwhile, the teens are organizing a party, a going-away party for Flash, who has been drafted and is heading off to Vietnam soon. Kraven, meanwhile, remembers that he had tracked Norman Osborn back to his home, so he doesn't know who the guy is, but he then goes and breaks into Norman Osborn's home, finds his servants there. They're like, he's out of town. I can't help you. So then Kraven is on the lookout for Norman Osborn, or he figures out Norman Osborn has a kid, so that might be a way to get at him. Page 9, we see some of John Romita's nice fashion illustration, pretty girl art there.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, I mean, everything that was so bad in these party scenes Port Werner Roth. It's like he nails it. Romita just nails it, and
Oh, yeah.
in a single panel, and his Gwen Stacy is so foxy.
Yeah. So Craven at this point is like, well, if I can't find Norman Osborn, I will kidnap his son, and has somehow tracked down his son. Hey, he's a jungle tracker. He can track people. Why not? And comes in and busts into this party.
By punching his way through the wall. Like, generally speaking, Craven, not a guy with superpowers, not a guy with
that's not true.
Super strength.
That's not true.
He takes like jungle potions to give himself, like, I think he's like boosting his strength a little bit with his jungle potions. I don't think he can punch through walls.
Oh, I don't know. He talks about being able to take down a bull elephant with his bare hands. So that does not ring untrue to me.
Are you telling me that Aaron Taylor Johnson couldn't take down a bull elephant with his bare hands? I mean, come on.
Who is playing Craven in the upcoming movie that is coming out. I just didn't buy it. I didn't buy that Craven could punch through a wall, but okay.
So Craven makes off with Harry and goes to some construction site. Spidey and him are having a fight. Spidey is able to get Harry away from Craven, and the fight continues. Foswell and JJJ both are heading to the site to get the news.
This is not the 50th issue. The 50th issue is still coming up, but this could have been the 50th issue, in that this really feels like, let's get everyone who has ever been in this book to reappear here and make them all sort of integral to the story. This is the ultimate regathering of the entire supporting cast of this book, and really shows off what a wonderful supporting cast this book has in terms of giving them all wonderful ways to interact, all looking absolutely gorgeous under John Romita's pen. It's got lots of great Spidey action in it, but it's also got lots of great supporting cast action in it.
Yes. So in the middle of this fight between Spider-Man and Craven, at one point, Spider-Man is taunting Craven, and he's thinking to himself, Craven's Achilles' heel is his pride. The more I taunt him, the more careless he'll be. And I don't know why I find that relevant right now. We'll just go ahead and move on. So anyway, Norman, who once again is not the Green Goblin at the moment and is trying to be a good dad, hears that his son has somehow been kidnapped and is trying to make his way to the scene. That's, of course, exactly what Craven wanted. So Craven, whips down some kind of a snare to draw Norman Osborn up. And he realizes that Norman Osborn has no idea what Craven is talking about, and his jungle senses allow him to know that the guy's telling the truth. At that point, he just goes ahead and tosses Norman Osborn off of the structure that's being built. Spider-Man saves him, and that's about it, except we then have the final goodbye to Flash as he heads off to Vietnam. Well, I think you and I, Matt, have been discussing how everyone's talking about him going to Vietnam, and it just seems like some exciting adventure to everybody. But here in these last two panels, we really start getting hit home what is going on. Pete says, I want to wish you all the best, Flash. Something tells me you've got what it takes to come out on top, fella, and I'm betting you do it. Sort of acknowledging that he might not come out on top. And then in the final panel, he's thinking to himself, he was probably my greatest fan. If only I could have told him who I really am just once. But why am I thinking of him in the past tense? He'll come back. He'll make it. Somehow, the good guys always win. Don't they? And it's like, this is the first time I've really felt that the Vietnam War has really shown up as sort of a specter on everybody at this point.
No discussion of whether or not America were the good guys in Vietnam. Let's not get into that.
Well, this was, I think, a little bit early for people to really be delving into that conversation at this point. I mean, I don't think that was necessarily that much of a part of the conversation in 1967, but I could be wrong.
But he is finally worried a little bit. And, so Flash will eventually come home and will be, a little disturbed by what he did. And he will have a Vietnamese wife, or maybe just a girlfriend, Shoshan, for a while. And then she will become a character when she moves to the United States with him. So, but this is it. This book has never been shy about writing people out after they've been main characters for a long time. Flash has been around since page 2 of Amazing Fantasy number 15. But, I really admire them for having this book constantly changing. And it's really sort of daring to have someone be sent up to Vietnam. And of course, brings home the fact that Peter is not volunteering to go to Vietnam, that there's a war on, and our hero is not signing up and is indeed worried about being drafted himself. Deal with the complexity of America's experience in Vietnam a little bit more when Flash comes back than they are right now when he's leaving.
So, Heidi, any other thoughts that you have on this book?
So, I mean, honestly, like as bad as that X-Men issue was, this is so great. It's such good comics, and even though there's too much dialogue, but you can see like this isn't one of the ones that I read originally. Like I said, I scanned it, and I've been scanning it while you were doing the description of it and reading some of it, and there's just so many great things in the art here. Just absolutely classic, like you said, John Romita's, girls and parties, like everything that didn't work in the X-Men issue is working so well here. And you can also see, as I read some of the other issues, the ones that Stan phoned in, and he was not phoning in Spider-Man. You could tell this is the one he cared about. And this is the one that, there's a lot of dialogue, but it's really good dialogue. Even though it's got the jargon, it's got cadence, it's got rhythm, it's got life. And then you got the Craven's, nipple lasers. So it's just good stuff. And this was a good reminder that there's a reason why we consider these classic comics. And I got to jump in here with one thing. So one of the best parts of all of this was that the ads are included in these scans. I'm wondering why these ads look so familiar. And again, I was very little when this comic came out, but I was probably looking at comics maybe, the next year. And like these ads were the same ads that I was seeing. But I feel like a lot of these ads were still in the comics 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years later. The exact same ads. Yeah. Well, the Grit ad for sure. And the Polaris nuclear sub, and of course the one that entranced me was the dinosaurs or the Roman Empire and the Knights, which aren't in these comics, but they're coming right along. We're well into the classic look of all of these. Oh, and here's the postal statement. Let's see how many copies this was selling. Wow, 340,000 paid circulation. Average number of copies sold between 12 months. Average circulation. 455 copies. So it was a different world.
Or you're shocked by how many it was or how few it was?
Oh, my God. The top comic now, if it sells 100,000 copies, it's like hallelujah. No, those were enormous numbers.
That's without any comic book shops. There were comic book shops didn't exist yet. These were all just newsstand sales.
Yeah, newsstand sales, yeah.
Heidi, we are happy to have you for as long as you have. So should we just keep on going, or do you want to pick the next one?
I'm going to pick the next one and then one more after that. And then, but the next one I'm sure is one that you had a lot to say about anyway. So after I read X-Men, I love Submariner. So I happened to read Tales to Astonish, issue 90. And boy, did this one hit home. Oh boy, from the Golden Past comes the menace of Bira, a rival of Namor. Bira has a gruesome yellow mustache, and he's pretty much Donald Trump. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So yeah, if we want to do that one next.
All right, let's go and do it. Let's do Tales to Astonish number 90, Submariner and the Incredible Hulk. From the Golden Past comes the Menace of Bira, cover clearly by Kirby and Coletta, sort of panicking seeing Coletta here on the cover, but thankfully he's not on the inside. You go inside the book, and it's Prince Namor the Submariner to be beaten by Bira. I guess we're going to pronounce it Byrrrah. Now, we talked about in the past how last month the only book in which Stan Lee was not credited on the same line as the artist, sort of giving him full co-creator credit, was the Submariner book with Bill Everett. But here we have for the first time Stan Lee and Bill Everett credited in big bold letters on the same line, produced with pageantry, presented with pride, Stan Lee and Bill Everett. So it's not saying that Stan is the writer and Bill is the artist. It is giving them co-creator credit on the issue. Lettered by Shara Gale, all one word, no idea who that is. Water ballet is staged by Irving Forbush. It is my impression that neither Krang nor Atuma were Golden Age villains. It's my impression that these were created by Stan and Jack. But here we have someone who they are very explicitly saying is a Golden Age villain, Bira. Of course, Bill Everett was the writer-artist on those old Golden Age books. And I like his Bira a lot. He has a big, brawny Atlantean with blonde mustache and goatee and bald head covered by a helmet. He talks about growing up alongside Namor as his cousin, and they would always get in fights. And now he has come back, and he has basically agrees with Steve, what Steve has been saying for a long time. He's saying that what we really need here in Atlantis is a plebiscite. We need to go ahead and impose democracy on Atlantis. And
if I can just jump in here, this one panel, and he's plotting, monologuing here. My greatest weapon lies in the fact that the people trust me, for it is the people who shall unwittingly become my greatest ally. They think of me only as a peace-loving, kindly nobleman. Yeah, they will learn otherwise. And I mean, yeah, it's a tale as old as time.
Well, but this comic is a lot like the Black Panther movie, and then you've got a Killmonger-esque character here. But as with Killmonger, he's basically right. Like everything Vera says in this issue is correct. Like he is in no way, he is not lying about Submariner. He is not making false promises about what he himself is going to do. He is saying that, like, look, we are living in a dictatorship. We should live in a democracy. We should have a plebiscite. Meanwhile, we have Namor hanging out with Lord Vashti. He hears about what is going on. It is always a pet peeve of mine when you have any sort of Times Square type place with a bunch of big TVs on the walls of the buildings, and there is audio on the TVs. Like, you know, I lived in New York City off and on for 20 years. There is no, can you imagine what it would be like in Times Square if there were audio on the giant TVs that were overlooking Times Square? It would be hell on earth. Not to say it is not already hell on earth, but it would be even more hellish on earth. So then everybody is getting their news from these things. Namor very belatedly comes back and agrees to, again, just as in the Black Panther movie, get in a big fight with Bera. They are each grabbing onto various fish and flinging fish at each other. And Bera basically wins the fight, is carried out on everybody's shoulders, and Namor is sulking with Dorma and Vashti about the fact that he has now been overthrown. I think this is a fascinating issue. It is great to finally deal with the issue that Steve has been complaining about this whole time of, is it better to live in dictatorship or democracy? And, you know, you were talking about how he is like Trump. He is like Trump. He is a populist demagogue, but it is absolutely fascinating, this issue. And I love Everett's art in this whole issue. I really love the way he pencils in Xpira.
This has a fight where they fling electric eels and squid at each other. It's absolutely compelling. And Everett is inking himself here. And you could see, even in this very poor reproduction, just, you know, how fine his lines were, how subtle his expressions were. Just everything about it is quality, you know, in terms of the art. This was his jam. This was his jam. But yeah, the election, it's way more complicated than we might expect. But you know, again, this kind of shows how Marvel Comics, why they became Marvel Comics. They weren't simplistic tales. They weren't always simplistic tales. There was a lot of nuance in them. This one only sold 255,000 copies a month.
My observations on this issue were largely about sort of the everyday life in Atlantis. So we have this one panel where you've got a woman pushing what looks like a shopping cart with skids. There is another woman who looks like she's wearing a one-piece bathing suit, carrying a purse, walking along. And then there's a dude in like a gladiator skirt and a cape and a helmet, carrying a briefcase, looking like he's trudging home after a soul-crushing day at work. And I just found that utterly fascinating. And then when Submariner is making his address to his people, there's a TV camera on him that looks exactly like a modern-day TV camera would in 1967, except apparently you have to operate it shirtless. So,
well, of course, you're underwater. Also, just slow you down.
Exactly. And I will say we usually try to keep contemporary politics out of this to be a refuge from that. But yeah, I don't know if we can necessarily avoid it in this case.
Well, this one.
Well, I realized that what I was saying before, I was saying like, oh, everything Bera is saying is correct. He's like Trump. I'm making it sound like I'm endorsing Donald Trump. America, I didn't mean to unintentionally endorse Trump there. I'm sorry.
And I might end up cutting out most of the political part of the discussion in this too.
Well, I think it's fair to note that the politics in an eternal subject in comic books, and obviously reading this one, we can't help but compare it to our present situation.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so
let's go into the back half of the book. The Incredible Hulk, The Abomination, a heroic Hulkish handiwork by Stan the Man Lee and Gil Sugar Lips Kane. So sometimes he's Gil Sugar Kane, sometimes he's actually Sugar Lips, lettered by Swingin' Sammy Rosen. So once again, we have Kane inking himself, which I think is just an embarrassment of riches. I love it. But this issue sort of encapsulates everything that is good and bad about the Hulk. It has a lot of the Hulk comic strengths. It has the Hulk comic's biggest weakness, which is very much on display in this issue, in that we are in the middle of a great story driver. The Stranger has ordered the Hulk to destroy the planet Earth in order to start life over again under the Stranger's dominion, which is an exciting storyline. And it is forgotten in 3 pages. And it's not like it ends. It's not like, the Stranger is hoist on his own petard or something. The Stranger just suddenly decides, yeah, I'm bored, I'm leaving now. And then it's like, okay, I guess I don't have to do that anymore. And then we're off to a new storyline. So then we begin with the Hulk on page 1 is wrecking a bridge on the orders of the Stranger. He is not actually killing anybody, which you would think would be necessary if you wanted to destroy 90% of the planet Earth. But he is starting off with just wrecking a bridge. But then suddenly the Stranger is like, now other matters in far distant galaxies require my presence, but when I return, the Hulk's strength shall have served me well. And he suddenly takes off, and we then get something which we have complained about in the past of the hero realizing, hey, here's something heroic I could do, kill myself. As the Hulk suddenly realizes, he becomes Bruce Banner, and he's like, uh-oh, if I become the Hulk again, then I'm going to have to continue to destroy the Earth.
And this is not the only time this month that happens, basically.
No, 1 or 2 times this month. So then he decides to go and do that. Meanwhile, we get the usual Thunderbolt Ross, Glenn Talbot, Betty Ross type stuff going on. And we then meet a new character. We meet, I guess, is he not named in this issue?
He is not.
I want to say Boris Spassky, but that's
Emil Blonsky is, I believe.
Emil
Blonsky.
Emil Blonsky, later to be played by Tim Roth in the MCU, both in the Incredible Hulk movie and then later, quite humorously, in the She-Hulk TV show, where they get a lot of good comedic mileage out of the character. Did they actually say he's a Russian spy, or is he?
Yes. They talk about a Russian spy that they're looking for as though that's something that's been going on in recent issues, even though it's not.
Yes. So then they've got a Russian spy. It turns out Emil Blonsky is the Russian spy. He sees Bruce Banner. I guess Bruce Banner is trying to turn on a gamma ray machine in order to kill himself, I believe.
Yes.
But then he is interrupted and taken away. And Emil Blonsky is like, oh, a gamma ray machine, turned up to even more power than the one that turned on the Hulk. I will go ahead and use it on myself. And he becomes the Abomination. So the Abomination, interesting Gil Kane design. I like it. I like later what Sal Buscema does with it more.
Gil Kane must have been under a little deadline pressure here, because it's not his best work by any stretch of the imagination. It just looks rushed to me. He could pull it off because he was such a great artist, but there's some little wonky faces here and there. In fact, I was thinking when I first saw it, I was like, was he just starting out? I'm like, no, of course not. He was 40 years old.
Hey, as a 49-year-old, I can tell you, you're just starting out when you're 40.
Yes, exactly.
You're just a kid.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I love Gil Kane's penciling and inking on the first page when the Hulk is tearing up the bridge. But I agree that when the Abomination first appears, which is, the most iconic panel, it is a sloppier panel. Page 5 is a fairly sloppy page, which is a shame because it's the page that introduces one of the Hulk's greatest villains.
It just looks like there were some deadline issues going on there. So
maybe more hastily inked than penciled. So then the Abomination starts tearing things up, and then the Hulk comes in. All thought of destroying mankind at the behest of the Stranger is long since forgotten, as indeed the Stranger himself has forgotten about it. And now this becomes a standard Hulk comic where you have the Hulk fighting another monster who then, of course, kidnaps Betty Ross and leaps away with her. And then the Hulk has to chase after her. And Thunderbolt Ross and Glenn Talbot are like, oh, we have to rely on the Hulk's heroism now. And that is where the issue ends. I guess at this point, the Abomination has knocked out the Hulk and left away with Betty Ross. And they say, there's only one who might have caught him, who might have stopped him. And there he lies. The one we hunted, we hounded. The one we allowed no peace, no respite. We got our wish. The Hulk is vanquished at last. And in his place, we have the Abomination. So we have the number one flaw of so many Hulk comics in that storylines are very quickly abandoned and strung along and mixed up in confusing ways. That is the number one flaw of this issue. That is the number one flaw of the Hulk series in general. However, we also get the strengths of the Hulk series in that we have a great villain. Both of these setups I like. The Hulk destroying the planet at the behest of the Stranger I like. And then the Hulk fighting against this is this goes back to the Hulk #1, a Russian spy on Gamma Base. But it is all sort of a mess. Heidi, what do you think of this issue?
It's some classic stuff. Obviously the Abomination, but I feel like I said, I don't know what was going on behind the scenes, but it just seemed rushed to me, and not a issue. I wonder, 67, I wonder what was going on. I'm going to take a look, if you don't mind, I'm going to do a little interregnum here before we do another issue. The bullpen bulletin pages have this, which are, of course, fascinating and bursting with drama and intrigue to the comics historian. I love this one. Did you know Jolly Jack Kirby's ears must be really burning? Every comics mag fan has his own personal favorite among all the artists employed by all the different companies. When it comes to the opinion of the pros themselves, when it comes to naming the artist, there isn't even a contest. Every time the conversation here at the bullpen gets around to artwork and what else is there to talk about, you should hear the top men in the field lower their voices when the name of King Kirby comes up. It's generally agreed that when you talk of superhero illustrations, of action drawing, of imaginative conceptions, of dynamic double-barrel drama, Marvel's many-faceted master simply has no peer. There is hardly a pro pencil pusher in the field today who hasn't been influenced by Jolly Jack's memorable masterpieces or by the constantly shattering impact of his creativity. Don't be embarrassed, Jack. This is just Stan's cornball way of telling you that it's been a ball all these years, pal, and the best is still ahead.
Wow, that's really touching. It's a very moving tribute, and then of course they would later end up in such acrimony.
I wonder what prompted it, though.
Yeah.
Well, Stan had lost Steve Ditko, and Wally Wood wasn't standing for the whole Marvel method thing for long anyway. And so he lost Wally Wood after a brief appearance. I think that he was aware that he needed Jack and he needed to keep him happy. I think I've heard that Wally Wood was basically saying to the other guys in the bullpen, look, you guys are being exploited here. What are you doing? You need to leave and go do something else. I guess he probably got into Ditko's ear, but Kirby's, I think he was just like, look, I got a family to feed, man. So he stuck around for longer. But I think that Stan was trying to do something other than paying better money and giving co-writing credit to try to keep him happy.
Yeah.
So that's, we've looked at the bullpen bulletins. We should also look at the letters page, where we have a letter from the first time we've ever seen a letter from someone who had gone to be one of my all-time favorite comic writers, and I would say the all-time greatest writer of the Hulk. Bill Mantlo has a letter here on the letters page. I am currently reading the Bill Mantlo Hulk comics to my son. I absolutely love them. I think he was the all-time master of the character, and it is great to see him show up here. I'm not going to read his letter, but he is a big fan of everything that's going on and a big fan of Gil Kane's cover and Bill Everett's inside. And it is great to see him here. Of course, Bill Mantlo would go on to most famously create Rocket Raccoon, but then tragically get into a accident, be hit by a car while he was rollerblading, and has been in a hospital room for the last 30 years or so. And has been on life support for the last 30 years or so, which is one of the all-time great tragedies in comics history. And, I think his brother's been taking care of him and letting him know about the success his characters have had over the years. But he is one of my all-time favorite writers, and it's great to see him here.
Yeah, absolutely. And these old letter pages are who's who of who would later go on to write comics, because they're constantly in there and they're so long. I mean, the internet of the time, man, they're amazing.
Yeah. And they give full addresses for these people, too.
That's how Wendy Peeney met her husband, Richard. They published her address, and apparently she got a lot of fan mail. So,
yep.
Yeah.
I'd like to do one more issue. Oh, Doctor Strange. Nick Fury and Doctor Strange. Because this is like the primo, the ultimate, we got some quality in here. So,
get some ladies in here. Let's get some lady comics, which of course you have been a great champion of over the years, and we have the only lady who was doing co-potting, penciling, and inking for Marvel Comics. So let's go ahead and jump into her comic. But first, do you mind if we do Shield first?
Of course. I mean, I'm a huge Steranko fan. So, I mean, this issue, like I said, is gold cover to cover as far as I'm concerned.
So, Steve, you want to go ahead and describe Strange Tales?
Sure. Well, the cover is a Shield cover, and it doesn't have any words on it, but it's just Nick Fury seeming to do some karate, it looks like, against a bunch of armed Hydra goons. Edited by Stan Lee, Marvel's James Bond. Written and drawn by Jim Steranko, Marvel's Man Flint. Lettered by Sam Rosen, Marvel's Secret Squirrel. So
you've got to know your 60s spy craze stuff quite a bit to know about the Arm Flint movies with James Covert, and then the Secret Squirrel cartoon, which was a spy cartoon that was airing at afternoons.
So the helicarrier has descended to just above the skyscrapers of New York in order to bring up these couple of platforms on something called the Fantastic Vortex Beam. One platform has a lot of personnel. The other one has a scientist and a new weapon that they are going to be testing. It goes back up into the upper atmosphere. Fury gets a phone call from the president. He is, telling him, you alone are responsible for this test, coming out. Like, oh, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and talk to this scientist who brought this thing on board, who has a big European-looking mustache and beard and sunglasses indoors, which isn't a giveaway at all that he is not playing on the up and up. Fury goes to sleep for a little while, and we see that his instincts and reflexes are like none other because he hears these Hydra goons silently slipping in while he's in the middle of his sleep.
Unfortunately, if bad guys are going to sneak into your room, you don't want to have too big of a vent in your wall. You don't want to have a big enough vent that everybody can get in. But oh boy, did they give him a huge vent in his wall that really allows huge hordes of bad guys to all sneak in at the same time. So just note for the future, don't have that big a vent.
He then jumps right out and starts kicking ass right away. I do notice on the bottom of page 3, the first panel in that bottom row, it looks like Fury is actually Mr. Fantastic there with his right leg. But we learned that S.H.I.E.L.D. agents wear, and apparently even in their sleep, infrared contact lenses so that they can see in the dark. So Fury knocks out the lights.
Presumably, Fury just has one of them.
Yes, presumably. So after Fury briefs the rest of his team on what has just happened and that, despite their high security, some Hydra goons are getting in, they then leave Fury's presence. And just as soon as they leave, Agent Bronson, who we have long since established is actually Supreme Hydra, I believe that is at this point Baron Strucker, hypno rings the rest of the guys, and that will pay off later. We then see that the scientist who brought in this weapon is, surprise, surprise, a bad guy. Who could have thought? And he goes and tries to electrocute Fury, but we find out later that Fury apparently has some kind of electrical attack neutralizer, which I think they had to establish in a previous issue. But he had that on, and that helped him survive it. So then this guy who brought in the so-called Q-ray that they're supposed to be testing also apparently has another weapon called the aphonic bomb. Aphonic essentially meaning no sound. So he just leaves Fury tied up in the room where the aphonic bomb is going to go off to destroy the autofac computer, which has been messed with to say that the girl is actually Supreme Hydra as opposed to the real Supreme Hydra. They want to destroy the machine before people can figure out it's been tampered with. So he sets off this aphonic bomb, which goes off completely silently as Nick Fury gets out in the nick of time. He is
no
then...
pun intended.
Well, yes. He is then jumped by some Hydra goons who it turns out are actually Gabe, Dum Dum, and Sitwell, Jasper. And so they were, remember, hypnotized. So why they then dress up as Hydra goons to then go ahead and jump him, I'm not sure. It would have been better for them not to dress up as Hydra goons and jump him as themselves.
Doing your story logic flaws.
So then the scientist, right as he's about to show off the so-called Q-ray, decides, well, I'm about to destroy everyone anyway, so why not go ahead and be like, Hail Hydra, right before actually setting the thing off, which seems like not the best idea. But Nick Fury is able to break in, get a really super interesting perspective on second panel in page 10. This is 3 panels that are all vertical and take up the whole height of the page. But the action in panel number 2 had to be horizontal. So Steranko just rotates the action 90 degrees, and we're basically looking at the whole thing at a 90-degree angle, which is a little bit odd.
And then panel number 3 is at a 45-degree angle, so you got to turn your head quite a bit on this page.
I'm sure that Jim Steranko considers these among the 150 innovations he brought to comic storytelling. So Heidi, I talked to him at HeroesCon this year, hoping to get him on the show. He had no interest, but he did go on a bit, and he said at one point that he was responsible for 150 storytelling innovations in comics, and he says, "You know how many there were before me?" I was like, I don't know, 20. He's like, pokes me in the chest. Zero. So this is clearly one of his 150 innovations.
Well, I'm not sure that there was 150, but he sure did bring a different sense of style and design. I mean, this is primo stuff, and there's just so many great images. And I mean, he's very much Kirby-esque, stealing a lot from Kirby, I will say. But like on the next page, 11, just at the bottom panel is like the helicarrier. The helicarrier, which probably was designed by Kirby, but it's still in the movies. I mean, it's in the movies almost exactly like this. It's like such an iconic design. It can't be improved on.
Well, Steranko usually draws it like it's in low Earth orbit rather than in the upper atmosphere.
Yeah. But, this was a classic run. This was a classic very innovative. His storytelling was so innovative. And, he had a ego to match, obviously, but it's just good stuff.
I think, is this the first one where he's been credited as scripter? I think so.
Yes,
I
believe so.
Scripting this one. So this one, he is credited on the page as plotter, scripter, penciler, and inker. And I believe he was also secretly coloring it as well. Still no colorist being credited. I find that this issue, the first one where he's handling so many different tasks, is a little softer than the last couple of issues. I find that almost all the art on page 5 is a little bit sloppy, and just the line work is a little bit unclear. Certainly Bronson's face on page 5. But there's still lots of great art in this issue. I especially love the top of page 9, where you have Sitwell with his, you can tell he's being hypnotized and is trying to kill someone against his will because his forehead is covered in sweat beads, which is always an indication of that, as he is reaching with a gun that is going off panel, which is one of Steranko's favorite things to do. And then it says, kill Fury, kill Fury, kill Fury, with hypno lines coming out of his forehead. And it is just absolutely gorgeous. And then we get another canted angle in the third panel. And there's great use of Zipatone in this whole issue, including on the first page where they're in the vortex beam. That is a great Zipatone beam that is zipping them up into the ship. Just a gorgeous issue.
One other quick observation, is looking at these comics as a whole. I mean, I can't stand Roy Lichtenstein, but I see why he was attracted to comics at this point. Looking at these in the scans that are, from the original comics and the bad printing, the bad registration. I mean, there is something so vital about the flaws. The flaws of the printing somehow makes it more, I don't know, it gives it some authenticity and power.
Yes.
Yeah, and you see it especially in this issue because or in this story, because how conceited Steranko was, but also just, he was ambitious. He was trying to push beyond the boundaries. He was trying to do something that was more sophisticated, and the poor reproduction of it somehow makes it even more endearing to me.
Yes, we've passed the time when Marvel would put the words pop art on the cover, but this is when they truly should be having the words pop art on the cover, because this is pop art.
Yeah, and I think I saw something recently with something Stan Lee wrote about the whole pop art thing, and that apparently while that was there, it had replaced the words Marvel Comics Group on the cover, and that was sort of a possible rebrand of the whole line as instead of Marvel. So who knows? Taking Stan Lee completely at his word is always a little dangerous too, but. Anyway, so I never finished summing up the story here. So the last couple of pages, Nick Fury ends up overloading the Q-ray. It blows up. The scientist is like, well, at least, we're taking down S.H.I.E.L.D., even though I'm about to die. The thing blows up. The helicarrier is about to capsize. As you said, there's sort of a good zero gravity kind of panel on the bottom of page 11. But then Nick is able to get them to use some sort of like repulsor beam sort of things to keep them up long enough to stabilize. And then at that point, they find out that the woman who had been framed as Supreme Hydra and who Nick has a thing for had been stashed inside the AutoFac computers. They find her and she is unconscious, and he's going to take her back to a hospital. But then Lyndon B. Johnson, who earlier had said everything depends on you, you're solely responsible, is like, you are confined to quarters until you can come back here and give me a briefing. And so they're like, nope, let Agent Bronson escort her back to the hospital. And of course, Agent Bronson is the actual Supreme Hydra. So
I got to say that I don't feel like Steranko really rises to the challenge of caricaturing Lyndon B. Johnson either of the times he appears in this issue. It doesn't look anything like Johnson.
No, not really.
Not at all. No.
Okay. So, moving on to Doctor Strange, Master of the Mystic Arts, we have the Fearful Finish. And the Fearful Finish is in full Artie Simek fearful mode, though not the spiky outlines, but the wobbly outlines, like you are shaking with fear. So we urge you to read this awesome announcement as quickly as possible, O true believer, a mystical Marvel masterwork by Stan Lee and Marie Severin. So once again, giving both of them equal storytelling credit. Lettered by Artie Simek, because a wealth of enthralling enchantment awaits thee, and not a wondrous word is to be missed. So Doctor Strange is trying to rescue Clea from the wrath of Umar, which he has been
as you do,
and indeed, which has been going on for the past issue or two. Doctor Strange is able to get to her, but then right then Umar sends some sort of a deadly blast. He absorbs it and is able to use his magic to essentially feed back to her. So it ends up hitting her instead, her being Umar. That buys Doctor Strange and Clea a little bit of time to talk together. Again, they have not spent more than maybe 5 minutes in each other's presence before now, but clearly Doctor Strange is fully devoted to her at this point. So, and she's like, no, it's hopeless. I'm doomed. Please save yourself. And he's like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to bring you to Earth. But somehow, because she doesn't have the same magical power he does, then he can't do this directly. He has to go through some other dimension. So he's trying to do this. He says he is traveling faster than any living being has ever traveled before. I don't remember. Does Stan Lee use the term faster than the speed of thought in this one? Because that's one of his favorite.
For once, he doesn't say that, but he clearly is moving faster than the speed of thought.
Yes.
And then begins a journey so mystifying, so incomprehensible, so utterly beyond our poor powers of description that we can only depict the barest details through the use of mere mortal illustration.
Yes. So apparently they are moving so quickly that they somehow end up on the dimensional road of repetition, where there's another copy of them elsewhere. They're afraid they're going to be basically stuck on this infinity loop.
This is very similar to the MCU Doctor Strange movie with Benedict Cumberbatch, where he catches Dormammu in a time loop where he is once again in this sort of dimension. I mean, it was Umar is from the dark dimension, just like Dormammu, and this sort of time loop he seems to be caught in is very much reminded me of that. Which, when I saw the Doctor Strange movie, I'm like, oh, that's not actually from a Doctor Strange comic, I believe, which I've pretty much read all of. But rereading this here, I'm like, oh yeah, this is kind of like that.
So Doctor Strange figures out a way to reunite themselves with their copies so they won't keep on looping around. Marie Severin does a fantastic job with essentially a white on black drawing of Doctor Strange and Clea, first hiding in this little hidey hole and then merging with their other selves. Quite well done. I don't know whether that would have been done in black and then reversed on photostat, or whether it would have actually been inked in white. But one way or the other, she pulls that off quite well. Doctor Strange and Clea continue to try to make it through this land to Earth, but Umar is able to make the land itself come up and grab them and try to pull them back in. Doctor Strange really finally is Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it really looks like on page 6, the mud and the dirt are coming up to physically grab Clea and pull her down. So Doctor Strange realizes he's in over his head. He sends a call to the Ancient One, who is not just sitting there meditating for once. He's actually picking up a book in his library. And he is able to create this road. A bridge takes shape composed of elemental thought, enduring only so long as both minds can maintain ethereal contact. And here's another one of those special notes. Architectural students are advised that the basic construction of this span may vary somewhat from the usual suspension type structure. Stickler Stan. So anyway, this is able to get them back to Earth. Last panel on page 7, that looks like a very unfortunately shaped doorway. It's clearly supposed to look kind of Middle Eastern. It looks like a part of the anatomy. Apparently they decide the only way to save Clea is to use the spell of vanishment that sends the subject of the spell somewhere. We don't know where, but because we don't know where, she'll be safe from Umar. But it strikes me, it's like, you have no idea what's there. You have no idea if she'll ever get back. Is this a good place you're sending her to? It is entirely unclear. But the panel where she is being sent there, the final panel on page 8, is just gorgeous. I will point out that, Jim Steranko gets so much credit for doing innovative things with Zipatone, or as other generations may call them, Ben-Day dots or Electrotone. But here Marie is at the same time using some of that same. Yeah, in the same book, doing some really nice effects using some of that same technology.
Well, I just, you know what, Steve, I'll let you finish the issue because, boy, do I have a lot of thoughts about this.
Okay, all right. So then Dr. Strange is like, okay, I got to go back and take on Umar. And the Ancient One is like, I really admire you and I'm proud of you for insisting on that. But no. And he binds Dr. Strange magically. And then he is going to banish Dr. Strange to some other location because, last lines from the Ancient One, Umar walks the earth. Continue next issue. All right. So, yes, Heidi, you have some feelings.
Well, I first off, probably Marie Severin also colored this because, of course, she was known as a colorist later on. And it's so sophisticated. Like, this is easily, of the books we've looked at, the best coloring. I'm sure Steranko had some input on it. Now, the colorists aren't credited in these credits, but you can, I would just be shocked if Marie hadn't also colored this because she was so good at it. And, all the, like you said, these techniques that are being used here for the reverse and the Zipatone and everything are quite advanced. And she understood the archaic coloring techniques of the time. And, I guess what I want to say is that obviously I was always reading comics, interested in seeing other women who made comics because, you want to see yourself. You want to see a role model for yourself. And, it wasn't literally until the 90s that I realized that Marie Severin had drawn Doctor Strange and the Hulk. And I read so many books I read the Comics Journal religiously. I read the Buyer's Guide religiously. And the only time you saw Marie Severin mentioned was either as, there are women who have done comics like Marie Severin, but that's all it would say. It's like, oh yeah, woman made comics. Marie Severin or Ramona Fradon, oh, they did comics. Or as a colorist, as she was acknowledged as one of the great colorists. Or, oh, her brother was John Severin, the great EC artist. And she's just as good as the guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I had been a teenager in the 60s, this would have been the book that I picked up every month and couldn't wait to read because it's got the sci-fi science fiction with Steranko and it's got this trippy Doctor Strange, cosmic stuff. And I would have loved this book so much. But yeah, it's just amazing to me that, we ran a piece of the Beat called, Marie Severin's alternate obituary, where it just takes off that maybe she got the recognition of what a great cartoonist she was in her own lifetime and how she went off and did EC Comics and she went and did political cartoons and she did Mad Magazine because she was a brilliant humorist, I can't think of anyone besides Wally Wood who could do superhero stuff and comedy just as well. And at such a high level. Honestly, I don't know who else ever did it, besides Wally and Marie. And, she was so talented. She was way more talented than her brother. And
I think we could praise Marie without throwing John under the bus. I'm a huge fan of John. But I think that I would say
I know way more talented than her brother. But you know what I'm saying? It's like, if their names had been reversed, who do you think would be famous now?
I think they are equally talented, and I think that they would.
Yes.
I think they should get equal credit for their equally amazing contributions to comic books literature. And of course, they did lots of great art together. They had a run on King Kull together, where they were where they had Marie penciling and John inking, or maybe it was the other way around. And absolutely gorgeous together. So they were even better when we could have two great tastes that taste great together when they would work together.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, I just think it's very interesting that if this had just been Mark Severin or M. Severin, I think, like I said, it never was like, oh, yeah, there was this woman. But, they were like, oh, yeah, she did these incredible issues of Doctor Strange. Granted, she came after Ditko, so she was always going to be second to Ditko. That's fair. But she did a great job on it. And it's sad that she didn't get more acceptance I think Marie went through a lot in her life. I mean, I knew Marie and talked to her many times, and she shunned the spotlight. She did not want to be, both her and Ramona, who I also spoke with, both of them, they didn't want to be singled out for being, I'm sure they were sick of it. They were sick of being like, oh, it's the girl in comics, the woman in comics, So they were sick of that.
For the listeners to make sure, you're talking about Ramona Fradon, right?
Yes, exactly. Ramona Fradon, yes. And so, yeah, Marie definitely shunned the spotlight, and I could only speculate what the reasons for that were. I don't think she was recognized as the great talent that she was. I think she really did get shoehorned as, a woman can draw comics, or as, a great cartoonist once said to me, who shall not be named, like, well, it's like a dog walking on its hind legs. A woman can draw comics.
Yes, no, I totally agree that she was unfairly lived in the shadow of her brother, that she is just as talented as he is, that she is an absolutely amazing writer, penciler, and inker on this entire run. Obviously, I love the Ditko issues. I thought that Everett's run after Ditko was underrated, but I think that she is better than Everett, almost as good as Ditko, and she is doing just fantastic work as co-plotter, penciler, and inker on this book, really rising up to Ditko's challenge of having wonderful psychedelic art in the background. And of course, she got the ultimate tribute of having one of her Doctor Strange pieces turned into the cover of a Pink Floyd album, which was sort of a tribute to how wonderfully psychedelic she was. And we're going to be getting to that issue soon. I did find, as with the first half with S.H.I.E.L.D., I found that things were a little more rushed in this book than they had been in the previous issue. I think that, Clea's three very different faces on page 3 are sort of a testament to this issue being a little more rushed. I thought that there were a couple of instances in this book, but she clearly put in a lot of effort into having them fight their negative image doubles. She put in a tremendous amount of work into this book, but there were just a few places, as with the Shield, that felt a little rushed. But
I agree. I agree. I agree with it.
And if you're talking about her as probably being the colorist, page 7, panel 3, the one in the bottom left-hand corner, the sort of core shadow being accentuated by the yellow light on our left and the sort of more natural light on our right is really sophisticated, incredibly sophisticated for the time.
Yeah. I mean, as is the panel above it, where they're on that, actually on Sound Bridge. I mean, I agree. There's definitely some rushed stuff in the kind of less important panels, but it seems like she was really putting a lot of effort into the most important panels. And again, if she did not color it herself, she certainly worked very closely with whoever did, because it's definitely more sophisticated than some of the other issues we're looking at here. So yeah,
it is.
With that, I must bid you adieu.
Okay. Well, all right, Heidi, thank you so much for coming on. This has been fantastic. It's been great having your opinion on all these comics. Especially, I'm so glad that we got to discuss Marie Severin's work, given your history with Friends of Lulu, and so wonderful that you knew her and that you can bring that perspective to this. But thank you so much for what you've had to say about all these comics. It's been great discussing them with you.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed it too. I mean, this has given me so much perspective. It's a great time out for me to look at these comics that are almost 60 years old, which is mind-boggling. But some of them seem so fresh. Some of them literally do seem just like classic fresh tales that, we're still enjoying today. And some of them, you could figure out which one are like, oh, thank God no one ever brought that one up. But yeah, Steve and Matt, thank you for having me on. This took a long time to come around, but I'm really glad I got to do it.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for making the time. All right.
Yeah.
Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Right. Bye.
Good luck next week. Vote.
Okay. Do we have anything to wrap up with here, Matt?
This has been a lot of fun. These were good books. Obviously, we're doing them a little bit out of order of how we normally do them. Hopefully, people will be able to figure that out and understand that things are all going to be a little bit different order than they usually are. But I think that this was a lot of fun. I'm so glad we had Heidi on.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Good to actually get some time to talk with her again here. But and also to our listeners out there, real quick, we were having some real problems with our distribution of our episodes for a little while there. First, Spotify took our entire show down for a little bit, and then apparently because of some problem with SoundCloud, which is where we host the stuff. But then Apple did not take it down to deal with it, so then it just started losing random episodes. We finally got all of those back. So all all of that should be taken care of by now. But if you had any problems with any episodes being missing or not appearing or disappearing, that should all be taken care of at this point.
Yes, a good time to go back and re-listen to the show from the beginning, which I have been doing for like the fourth time because I love this show and I like going back and listening to it. But,
well, and also it's a good way to unplug from the real world when it's just completely unbearable.
Yes, you can go back and listen to 105 episodes of Marvel Reread Club.
Disappear into another world. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And as always, take care and stay safe out there.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Marvel Reread Club. Please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Your reviews and ratings are a great help and always appreciated. We love hearing from you. Go to marvelrereadclub.com to find notes and join the discussion about this episode. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.